The 1980s are a special decade. The fashion, the music, people look back at the 80s as the best we've ever had it. And in cyclocross terms, the 80s are just as much a special time, because the 80s is the decade where cross as we know it really started to take shape. The foundation of the Super Prestige in 1982 led cross into its modern form, and starting in 1980, one man set in stone the foundations of what a Belgian cross superstar could be. Allow me to introduce to you Roland Liboton. Roland Liboton would be born on the 6th of March 1957 in Leuven, growing up in the nearby sleepy village of Rivalry. He would pick up cycling at a young age, slowly rising through the ranks. It's hard to find much information about Liboton, or frankly anybody growing up in the 60s. Which means that this story doesn't start with a teenager or a child prodigy, but with a 20-year-old man in the year 1978. And weirdly for someone born in a small Belgian village, this story starts in the Basque country. See, back in the 70s, the World Championships consisted of two events, the professionals, nowadays the elites, and the amateurs. This was because there were frankly not many professionals, never mind any junior riders. Young talent would take part in the amateur race, and if you were deemed good enough by a manager at a professional team, then they'd try and sign you and you'd move up to the professional ranks. This is exactly what happened to Liboton. In 1978, in Amorebieta, Liboton became the amateur world champion, a welcome relief for Belgian cross fans. Since Erik de Vlaming started to decline a few years earlier, Belgium was missing from the absolute top end of the sport. Liboton's world title showed that change might well be coming. After his world title, Liboton started to win amongst the top level. A week later he'd win the driver course in Overijse for the very first time. The following season, Liboton would defend his amateur world title and take a fourth win as an amateur in the Swiss town of Lausanne. After that, Liboton became professional with the Mark Zeepcentrale Superior team and instantly showed himself to be amongst the best of the world at only 22 years of age. Liboton turned professional in 1979 with the Mark Zeepcentrale Superior team, and he instantly showed himself to be amongst the best in the world at only 22 years of age. In his debut 1979-1980 season, he'd win 4 times, and including that was the Belgian national title. Liboton would also race the elite world title for the first time, doing so in Wetzikon in Switzerland. Now, Wetzikon is a few minutes drive from the home of a certain Albert Zweifel, an Albert Zweifel that had won the past 4 world titles and was the lead of a dominant Swiss side that also included Peter Frischknecht, Erwin Linhart and Gilles Blazer. The expectation coming into Wetzikon was a 5th world title for Zweifel. It was impossible for the Swiss to lose here. However, Liboton would do everything to change that. As the race starts, quickly a group of 4 is established: Zweifel, Liboton, the German Klaus-Peter Thaler, and another young talent, the Dutchman Henny Stamsnijder. The course in Wetzikon has one major difficult section, a fast, sketchy, off-cambered descent that on the frozen Swiss ground is absolutely terrifying. Everybody had trouble with the descent, but it was the home man Zweifel who would make a costly mistake on the second to last lap. Liboton would just about avoid his rival, and he shot off into the distance, never to be seen again, riding around so fast that he had to be told he was even at the finish. He thought there was one more lap. And so, in Wetzikon in 1980, Roland Liboton became champion of the world for the very first time. Barely 22 years of age, he had defeated the great Albert Zweifel in his own backyard, something Zweifel would never forgive the Belgian for. Over the next 12 months, Liboton would show off his new rainbow bands with great style. He'd take 9 victories, including a second Belgian title. However, the big showdown would once again be the World Championships. In the Spanish Tolosa, it would be a 3-way battle once more between Liboton, Stamsnijder and Zweifel. Before the race, Liboton, who was friendly with Stamsnijder, struck a deal that if one of them attacked, the other would sit up and make Zweifel chase. When on the 3rd lap Stamsnijder slowly snuck off the front, Liboton did exactly that. He sat on and he held his word. He made Zweifel do all the work, but the Swiss wasn't quite strong enough. Stamsnijder would become world champion for the first time, the first Dutch rider to achieve that. Liboton, he'd finished second. He'd kept his promise, but admitted to being slightly disappointed because he could have won. Liboton's hostility towards Zweifel can be tracked back to earlier in that season, where at the Swiss Weidker Zurich, Zweifel refused Liboton entry to the changing rooms and tried to mess with him in other ways as well in an attempt to stop a repeat of what happened in Wetzikon. To Liboton, this really hit him, and he decided from that moment on he would always have to beat Zweifel. It became even more important than winning to the Belgian. In the 81-82 season, Liboton would win a 3rd consecutive Belgian national title, also claiming 4 other wins. His main goal though would be reclaiming the world title. In Lanarvilly, Liboton and Zweifel would face off in another titanic battle. In the end, Liboton would come out on top once more, reclaiming the world title from Stamsnijder, who'd finished 3rd. With his 2nd world title under his belt, Liboton's star power started to rise, becoming a household name in Belgium and gaining status as a major celebrity. Liboton would start to live a life of fast cars and pretty women, similar though less alcohol inflicted to footballer George Best. His partying wouldn't slow him down much, however, as we entered the 1982-83 season. "1982 is one of them seismic years in cyclocross history, because it's the year that the Super Prestige was founded. For the first time ever, cyclocross had an overall classification to fight for, a prize that was not the World Championships jersey. The first Super Prestige was held in Diegem on Boxing Day in 1982, and Roland Liboton would be the winner, beating Dutchman Rein Groenendaal, father of a certain Richard Groenendaal. Liboton would also get the better of Johan Gilbert to win the final round in Overijse. However, illness meant that he'd miss round 3 in Gavere, which then had the knock-on effect of him being knocked out of the overall standings. Liboton would this season total 11 victories, including another Belgian title, his 4th. At the World Championships in Birmingham, Liboton would become a 3-time world champion, again defeating Zweifel by a handful of seconds, as the two and German Thaler fought out another close battle. With a 3rd world title under his belt, Liboton became unstoppable. He was the best wherever he went. He won 14 times in the following season, being completely unstoppable on occasion. However, he would again fail to win the Super Prestige, meaning that despite winning 5 of the 6 rounds, he'd failed to win the overall due to again illness missing a round. Stamsnijder would once more win the title. A 5th Belgian title would follow, a 5th consecutive title being a record and putting him level with Maurice Senave and Georges van der Meers, meaning he's only 1 away from equalling the record for national championships. That year again though, the peak of the season would be the World Championships. Held in the Dutch town of Os, Stamsnijder was the home favourite. He had to win here. However, early on in the race he would encounter problems with his chain dropping and a poor bike change. Zweifel and Liboton go up the road, the Swiss slowly cracking under the Belgian pressure. That is until somewhere off camera, Liboton gets punched by a supporter. It knocks the wind out of him and it lets Zweifel and Stamsnijder back into the race. The 3 great rivals can't shake each other and all back themselves in the sprint. Zweifel opens up, but he's quickly caught by Liboton and Stamsnijder, the 2 rivals and friends going head to head, but it's Liboton who is the fastest. He wins a 4th world title and is undoubtedly the best rider in the world. As a 4-time world champion, Liboton would continue to dominate cross. He'd win 3 Super Prestiges and a bucket load of other victories the following year, the biggest including a first ever Super Prestige overall victory. Liboton would also claim a 6th consecutive Belgian title, meaning he was now the record holder for most Belgian titles, alongside Firmin van Kerbroek and Erik de Vlaming. But on the day of the World Championships, he'd go absolutely nowhere, and neither did Stamsnijder or Zweifel. In a weird turn of events, it was Klaus-Peter Thaler who'd become world champion ahead of a young Adrie van der Poel. Liboton was simply not good enough, and he finished 10th on the day, which is still better than Stamsnijder, who failed to finish the race, and Zweifel, who never even started it. The following season would follow a familiar pattern. In 1986, Liboton would again win the Super Prestige. He'd take a 7th national title to be outright the most successful rider ever in that competition. However, he would take ill just before the Worlds in Lembeek, leaving the race during lap 3 eventually. Zweifel would claim a 5th world title that time. 12 months later it was the same story. Liboton was now an 8-time Belgian champion, but illness before the World meant he wouldn't even start in Mlada Boleslav in the Czech Republic, as Thaler won a 2nd world title. It seemed as if Liboton's free-flowing, partying lifestyle was starting to catch up with him. He was no longer untouchable, and that seemed to rock him somewhat. However, 1987 would be a year of improvement once more, and it was all down to a change in team. In the Super Prestige, Liboton cleaned house. Of the 10 rounds he won 7, stalling to a 3rd Super Prestige title. He would also be victorious twice in a brand new competition set up for that season, the Gazette van Antwerpen Trophy. Achievements that were enough to convince a certain François Lambert, owner of All Drive Rentals, to sign him to his brand new cycling team. ADR were a weird team. They were run by the flamboyant François Lambert, and they were a small team that nonetheless pulled off some great victories with some great riders. Under the management of José de Cauwer, ADR won the Tour of Flanders and Paris-Roubaix, their most known stunt being Greg LeMond's stunning victory of the 1989 Tour de France after being seriously injured in a hunting accident only a year prior. ADR approached Liboton, offering to triple his salary. Liboton, currently at the Italian Guelcotti team, decided that he would love to ride for the Belgian team for 3 times the pay, so obviously he said yes, and so he joined. However, it quickly transpired that ADR didn't actually have the funds to pay Liboton, or anyone else for that matter. During his time at ADR, Liboton would take a final 6th place at the World Championships, win once more in the Super Prestige in Diegem 1988. He would also successfully take 3 more Belgian titles, lifting his total to a stunning 10 consecutive titles. He is the only rider to win a Belgian cross title during the entire 1980s. Liboton though would never be paid by ADR, not anything at all. The lack of reward impacted his motivation, and the fact that he was being taxed for a mega salary that he received none of meant that he was losing money hand over fist. Liboton would take Lambert to court, but so did Le Mans, and so did everybody else, and when it turned out that Lambert owned the banks upwards of 40 million, Liboton ended up quite low on the list of importance for Lambert to pay back. To this day, Liboton has never gotten paid. Roland Liboton's 10th Belgian title would also end up being his last. In 1990, he'd be dethroned by Denny de Bie as he finished 2nd. Liboton's final victory would come in December 1990 as he took victory in the GVA Trophy in Essen, his 156th career victory. Liboton would race for 2 more years but never really feature near the front of races. Being the winner that he was, Liboton was no longer satisfied if he couldn't compete for the win, and that resulted that in 1992, at the age of 33, Liboton would retire from cyclocross. Liboton never really left cross either, however he did take one crack at the Tour de France back in 1981. He would not feature largely and left the race during the 15th stage. Since his retirement in '92, Liboton has settled down, no longer being mad for the flashy cars and the pretty ladies. However, he is still a very outspoken figure. Liboton works largely as a parcours checker nowadays. It's his job to make sure that the courses are up to standard and don't feature anything dangerous or illegal. Outside of this, Liboton will make the occasional appearance on various cycling talk shows and do interviews for most newspapers, where he spends most of his time proving the fact that everything was better in the 80s and that nowadays no one's as good as they were and the World Championships aren't as good as they used to be. By and large though, Liboton's focus is on staying healthy himself as he gets older. Through his 15-year career, Roland Liboton amassed an impressive 156 victories, including 21 victories in the Super Prestige, a record only Sven Nys and Mathieu van der Poel have bettered. He'd also win the overall of the competition 3 times. Liboton also has 4 victories in the GVA Trophy. Not a mean feat considering the competition was founded some 9 years after Liboton actually turned pro. Roland Liboton's defining victories though come at national and international level. With 4 world titles, Roland Liboton is the 5th most decorated crosser of all time, a place he shares with Mathieu van der Poel. Liboton's 10 consecutive Belgian titles are a record that still stand today. Nobody else has managed double figures on the men's side. Nys is his nearest rival with 9. Only one other rider has even managed more than 3 consecutive Belgian titles, Maurice Senave during the 1930s. Once again, Liboton managed all 10 consecutively. One final distinction about Roland Liboton is his stellar record on one of the most legendary crosses in the world. In Overijse, the mother of all cross, Liboton has a frankly outrageous 16 victories, amassed over various Belgian championships, super prestiges and standalone editions. He is the king of Overijse and it shows just how good he was. Liboton's style on the bike was much like his style off of it, flamboyant and characterful. Where his big rival Henny Stomsnijder was a massive diesel engine, a major rider who ran well, Liboton was the daring one. He had more acceleration and he was lightning quick up steep inclines. Liboton was to Stomsnijder what Van der Poel is to Van Aert. That's the easiest comparison I can think of. Liboton also possessed a killer sprint that saw him win numerous crosses. Mentally, Liboton is also so strong. He's a born winner. He refuses to admit defeat and submit to anybody else. Losing would drive him to perform better time and time again. To Roland Liboton, second doesn't matter. It's just the first loser. And it's that mentality that made Liboton the greatest crosser of the 1980s. And it's that aforementioned mentality above anything else that pushed Roland Liboton to be one of the best crossers of his generation and arguably of all time. Liboton is a showman. He made the best of his time in cross and he lived life to the fullest, even if that may have been to his detriment in later years. Nonetheless, his records still stand today and some of those may well never be broken. Liboton is indisputably amongst the biggest racers in cyclocross history. Whether he is the biggest, I'll leave up to you. No matter where you stand on the matter, Den Roel will always be remembered as the star of the 80s, as the greatest showman.